For the last 30 years, nutrition advice failed because the rules kept changing. Fat was bad, carbs were bad, protein was optional. Now the US has flipped the food pyramid, literally. And for the first time in a long time, it's pointing back to real food. My brother Yani and I have eaten this way for our entire adult lives. Real food, protein first, minimal processing. That's how we've stayed lean, strong, and high performing into our late 40s year after year. In this video, we'll break down what actually changed, why it matters, and why this update quietly confirms what has worked in the real world for decades. The problem is that most people think health breaks suddenly. One diagnosis, one bad blood test, one prescription. It feels like something went wrong overnight, but metabolic health doesn't fail like an accident. It fails like erosion. You've seen this scene before. Someone trains hard, eats what looks like a normal diet. Maybe not perfect, but reasonable. And then a doctor says that their blood sugar is up, cholesterol is creeping, blood pressure is borderline, and they're confused because they don't feel sick. So the response is medication, not a look at what's been happening daily for years. Think about brushing your teeth. If you skip brushing once, nothing happens. Skip it for a week, still fine. Skip it for a year, you don't suddenly lose a tooth overnight. You wake up one day with decay that's been building quietly the whole time. Food works the same way. One meal doesn't make you sick. It's the accumulation of daily inputs that eventually shows up on a lab report. That's why one line from the new guidelines matters. Better health begins on your plate, not in your medicine cabinet. That statement gets the sequence right. Most chronic disease isn't a medication deficiency. It's a food quality problem created inside modern food environment. Ultra-processed defaults, constant snacking, low protein, high refinement. Repeat that long enough and the body adapts poorly. These guidelines finally shift the focus back to inputs instead of symptoms. Food first, lifestyle next, medication when truly needed. That order matters because medication manages numbers, but food quality changes the signal that drives those numbers in the first place. One masks the problem, the other addresses the cause. But that still leaves a practical question unanswered. If food is the lever, what did the new guidelines actually get right this time that they got wrong for decades? And that brings us to the biggest upgrade in the entire pyramid. Protein is finally treated as essential. The problem is that for decades, protein was treated like a side note, something optional, something you're only worried about if you were a bodybuilder. The old official recommendation of 0.8 grams per kilogram was presented as enough, and most people assumed that meant optimal. It never did. It's like running a construction site with just enough bricks to stop the walls collapsing. The building technically stands, but you're never finishing rooms. You're never reinforcing floors. You're never adding strength. Day after day, the workers show up, but there's never enough material to actually build anything new. That's what low protein does to the body. You survive, but you don't thrive. The new guidelines finally fix this, and it's the single biggest upgrade in the entire pyramid. Protein recommendations have moved to 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. That's a massive shift. And here's the part most people were never told. The old 0.8 number was never designed for optimal health. It was a survival threshold, a minimum intake to prevent deficiency. It was a line in the sand that said, you won't waste away if you eat this much. It was not meant to help you build muscle, preserve strength, support metabolism, or age well. Yet it became treated as a target, and that misunderstanding explains a huge amount of muscle loss, fatigue, and metabolic slowdown people now accept as normal aging. Protein matters because muscle matters. Muscle isn't cosmetic tissue, it's metabolic tissue. It helps regulate blood sugar, it supports insulin sensitivity, it raises resting energy expenditure. So when muscle declines, the entire system becomes harder to manage. Protein also improves satiety and appetite control. It reduces constant grazing and the pull towards ultra-processed foods. This is not just for athletes. In fact, it matters more as you age because the body becomes less sensitive to protein. You need a stronger signal to stimulate repair and growth. So that's why spreading protein across meals matters and why small protein-poor meals don't cut it. The guidelines also emphasize protein quality, and that's critical. They highlight whole food sources like eggs, dairy, seafood, meat, including red meat in moderation, and whole food plant sources like beans and lentils. What they quietly move away from is the idea that powders, bars, and shakes should replace meals. Those can be useful tools, but they are not a foundation. Our rule is simple. Every meal needs a protein anchor. Pick the protein first, then add the plants, then add carbohydrates as a tool, not a default. That's exactly how we've coached the Unity Gym and UMS tribe for decades. But once protein is handled properly, a bigger issue becomes impossible to ignore. Even with enough protein, many people are still eating foods designed to work against them. And that's where the guidelines make their most overdue correction. The problem is that for years, nutrition advice argued about fat versus carbs, while ignoring the real driver of poor health: processing level. People thought they were failing because they picked the wrong macro, when the real issue was that most of their food wasn't really food anymore. It's like fueling a high-performance car with something that looks like petrol but burns dirty. Sure, the engine still runs, the car still moves, but over time, everything gums up. Power drops, warning lights come on, and eventually something fails. Ultra-processed foods work the same way. It keeps you alive, but it slowly degrades the system. This is where the guidelines finally get honest. They stop debating fat versus carbs and focus on what actually drives overconsumption and metabolic damage. Ultra-processed, packaged, ready-to-eat foods. They explicitly recommend avoiding them. They go harder than ever on added sugar. They directly call out sugar-sweetened drinks. And they even acknowledge that swapping sugar for chemical sweeteners is not a free win. Why? Because ultra-processed foods are engineered to be overconsumed. Low satiety, high reward, minimal nutrition. This isn't a willpower issue, it's food design. These products are built to bypass normal appetite control, spike reward signals, and keep you eating well beyond what you actually need. So when people say, "I can't stop," that's not weakness, that's the system working as it's intended. The most practical advice in the entire document is also the simplest. Eat foods that spoil. If it lasts forever, it's probably not food. Shop on the outside aisles of the supermarket. Buy ingredients, not products. Cook most meals at home. Those rules don't require tracking, apps, or obsession. They just move you back toward food that your body actually recognizes. And once you start eating real food again, something interesting happens. Hunger changes, cravings shift, digestion improves, which leads to the quietest but most important upgrade in the guidelines. They finally explain why this happens inside the gut. The problem is that when people struggle with digestion, cravings, energy, or inflammation, they assume discipline is broken. They think they lack willpower. They think they're inconsistent. But most of the time, the issue isn't behavior, it's biology. It's like trying to steer a car with the wheels out of alignment. You can grip the wheel harder, you can focus more, but the car still pulls off course. Gut health works the same way. When the system underneath is disrupted, everything feels harder than it should, no matter how disciplined you are. This is the sleeper win in the new guidelines. For the first time, gut health is treated as a core pillar, not a fringe topic. They talk directly about the gut microbiome. They acknowledge that ultra-processed foods disrupt gut health, and they promote fiber-rich whole plants and fermented foods as tools to support microbial diversity. They even name specific foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, and miso, which is a quiet but important shift. Why this matters is simple. Gut health influences digestion, inflammation, blood sugar control, appetite regulation, and even mood. When gut health is poor, hunger signals become noisy, cravings feel urgent, energy dips without warning. People interpret that as a motivation problem, when in reality, the system regulating those signals is impaired. Our coaching approach has always reflected this. Build a fiber base with real plants, vegetables, legumes, fruits, whole grains. Then add one fermented food per day. You don't need perfection. You don't need variety for variety's sake. You need consistency. Small daily exposure that gives the gut the signals that it needs to adapt. And once gut health is supported, the entire experience of eating changes. Satiety improves, blood sugar stabilizes, cravings quiet down, which sets up the final question most people never ask. If the food environment matters this much, how do you actually apply these guidelines in real life without overthinking every meal? The problem is that most people try to apply nutrition rules in isolation. One rule for carbs, one rule for fats, one rule for fruit. It turns into confusion fast, and people either overcorrect or give up. The issue was never single foods. It was how processed versions replaced real ones. It's like walking through a supermarket where the same ingredient shows up in 10 different disguises. Wheat becomes bread, cereal, bars, snacks and drinks. Fruit becomes juice, concentrates, syrups and flavoring. Oils move from whole foods into fried, packaged meals. People think they're choosing variety, but they're actually choosing the same processed inputs over and over. This is where the supporting updates quietly matter. Starting with carbohydrates, the guidelines stop demonizing them and target the real issue: refinement. Whole grains and fiber-rich foods are encouraged. White breads, packaged breakfast foods, and refined grains are discouraged. That's the right fight. Carbs aren't the enemy. Low fiber, highly processed carbs are. We use carbohydrate as a performance tool, more around training, less when inactive. Always prioritizing quality. Context matters more than quantity. And fruits and vegetables stay central, but with an important clarification. Whole fruits and vegetables are reinforced and juice is clearly separated because juice removes fiber. It concentrates sugar. It's not the same as whole fruit. Whole fruit isn't the problem, processing is. When fiber stays intact, appetite control and blood sugar regulation stays intact too. Strip it out and the food behaves very differently in the body. And then there's fats and oils. And this section matters more than most people realize. The guidelines move away from blanket fear of saturated fat and instead focus on fat quality and context. They highlight fats that come packaged in real foods: meat, eggs, seafood, dairy, nuts, seeds, olives, avocado. For cooking, olive oil is prioritized. Butter and beef tallow are acknowledged as options. They never say seed oils are banned, but they clearly recommend avoiding deep-fried and ultra-processed foods. In the real world, that's exactly where refined industrial seed oils dominate. The practical takeaway is simple. Make olive oil your base cooking fat. Use whole food fats that naturally come with food. Reduce fried and packaged foods you don't control. That aligns perfectly with the intent of the guidelines. And once all of this is put together, the picture becomes clear. This isn't about restriction or perfection. It's about building meals from real inputs in the right context. Once you zoom out, all of the supporting updates point in the same direction. Less processing, more real food, more control over what actually touches your body. And that opens up a layer most people don't expect to see in a nutrition guidelines at all. Which brings me to my final point, a layer worth addressing. This part wasn't spelled out in the final guidelines, but it came up in the scientific discussions behind the scenes, and it's something we've paid attention to for years. The problem is that food doesn't affect you through calories and macros alone. It also acts as a delivery system. Packaging, storage, heating, all of that matters, especially when it happens every single day over decades. It's like leaving water sitting in a garden hose under the sun. The water looks clean, it still quenches your thirst, but the longer it sits there, the more it picks up things you didn't put there intentionally. Food stored and heated in plastic works the same. The food itself might be fine. The contact environment is the issue. And if you're a man in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, this matters more than you think, because testosterone doesn't crash overnight. It drifts slowly, quietly, and often without obvious symptoms until performance, recovery, and drive start slipping. This is why the Scientific Advisory Committee recommended reducing exposure to food packaging chemicals. That specific recommendation didn't make the final cut of the guidelines, but the concern didn't disappear. Chemicals can migrate from plastic into food. Heat increases that migration. Fat increases it further. And this brings us to a conversation most people don't expect to hear in a nutrition discussion: testosterone. There has been a documented decline in average testosterone levels in men over recent decades, independent of age. We don't have a single confirmed cause, but environmental exposure is a strong suspect. Certain plastic-associated chemicals are known endocrine disruptors. Human studies show associations between higher exposure and lower testosterone levels in some populations more recently. Microplastics have been detected in human tissues, including reproductive tissue. Now, this isn't fear-based science, it's evolving science. Measurement is difficult, causation isn't fully established, but there's enough signal to justify caution, especially when exposure is frequent, passive, and avoidable. And for men who care about strength, recovery, body composition, and long-term vitality, those small daily exposures add up. That's why our advice here is practical, not dramatic. Don't microwave food in plastic. Don't store hot or oily foods in plastic. Use glass, stainless steel, or ceramic where you can. That's not paranoia, that's risk management. The same kind you already apply to training, load, recovery, and long-term performance. And notice how this still fits the core theme of the guidelines. Less processing, less packaging, fewer chemical exposure pathways. When you clean up food quietly, you also clean up what comes with it. At that point, the message becomes hard to miss. These guidelines aren't about dieting. They're about removing friction from the system. And when you do that consistently, health stops feeling like something you have to fight for. So yes, the food pyramid shifted. Protein is prioritized. Ultra-processed foods are finally called out. Gut health matters. Fats are framed through real food, not fear. This is how we've coached the Unity Gym and UMS tribe for decades. Strong bodies aren't built in surgeries and pharmacies. They're built in gyms and kitchens. If you want one simple step to start, build one meal today with a real protein, 2 handfuls of plants, and 1 gut-friendly food. And then repeat, because guidelines don't change bodies, daily habits do. And if you want to learn more about the Unified Movement System, aka UMS, you can click or tap the screen to watch that video, and I'll see you there.